session at Bank of Baroda, Betak. Earlier in the morning, we talked about different and diverse identities, personal orientations. Now, we'll talk about the diverse languages and dialects. The session is titled IndLit, Many Languages, One Literature. The participants, K.R. Meera, Shubhangi Swarup, who will join us shortly, Aruni Kashyap, in conversation with Arunava Sinha. May I please welcome all our participants to the podium with a loud round of applause, please. K.R. Meera and Aruni Kashyap have kindly consented to do book signings right after the session. I'll also quickly check with Shubhangi as soon as she gets here. Thank you.
Good morning. Shubhangi will be joining us soon. She's represented by an empty chair at the moment, which is quite fitting given that we all deal in magical realism. So, I'm going to just very quickly lay out the journey that we are hoping to take during this conversation. As you've seen, the topic suggests that we have many languages in which people write in the country that is called India, but is there one Indian literature that they all add up to? And this is a proposition that we will examine, interrogate, and maybe at the end of it be as much in the dark as before, or maybe we'll come up with some very clear answers. There is an old story, and I'm very sorry to repeat a story that is somewhat not very sexist, but some stories must be repeated the way they are only so that we can reject them. So in this particular story, there is a lady who is accosted by her next door neighbor and says, "Where is the saucepan that I lent you?" And the lady says, "First, you never lent me a saucepan. 2, I returned it 3 days ago. And 3, in any case, it was very badly dented and I could not use it." So the whole point is, Indian literature, the idea of Indian literature is a little bit like that. Does it even exist like the saucepan? If it exists, then is it badly dented and in need of repair? So both possibilities exist. We're a little bit of like Schrodinger's literature. So let me just start by, so here we have, it's also important to lay out the geography. Aruni writes in both Assamese and English, or should I say Ohomia? What's the right way to pronounce it?
Ohomia.
Ohomia, okay. Shubhangi is here. Okay. Isn't it great to get applause as you walk down the aisle, Shubhangi? That's just your excuse. Come, join us. Right. So,
or Assamese, anything.
Or Assamese,
yeah.
I think he doesn't want his mother tongue mangled by me through the course of this conversation. So, Assamese. Meera writes in Malayalam, and are you planning to write in English ever, Meera? Are you planning to write ever in English? No. She will continue to write in Malayalam. Shubhangi writes in English, but are you ever planning to write in another language?
I write in English because right now I don't have a choice, but I would love to expand that.
Okay, that's great. So we have three kinds of, or 4 kinds of literature represented over here. So first, let me start out by asking, do you think that given that we have more than a dozen flourishing languages with their own literatures in the landmass, in the geographical entity called India, that it is even possible to think of a single Indian literature? Aruni?
Okay, I think India is a continent. I think we all are on the same page here about that. And so it is, I think also how canons are built, it's largely dependent with the idea of nation building. So as we imagine the nation stronger and better, and then we come up with these definitions like Indian literature, American literature, British literature. But I think Indian literature is a conglomeration of all these languages and literary traditions. I mean, every state has so many other minor literatures that we don't even know about. Even in Assam, we have Bodo literature and many other literary traditions that are not actually recognized by the Indian official narrative, such as missing literature, literature written in dialects and other languages. So yeah, it's all actually a conglomeration of this composite, literary traditions.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there is one definition of Indian literature.
But you're still willing to consider that there may be something called Indian literature, which is a conglomeration of all these diverse strands.
I'm willing to consider there are many, many Indias, and all these many Indias make up Indian literature.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to you on that, Meera.
See, Arunava, when I started writing in 2001, I write in a regional language called Malayalam, which is spoken by the people in Kerala. It's a small state and it's a small language. And by the number of, I think still it's some third largest spoken language or something. Anyway, when I started writing in 2001, I thought Indian literature means the literature in regional languages. Because at that time, my impression was there was kind of a prejudice towards, a bias towards regional language literature, and we were considered someone inferior to those Indians who are writing in English. And who were those Indian English writers? They were mostly educated in the premium institutions, either in the country or outside the country. And it has, I had a prejudice towards that. But recently, after our contemporary political turning of the events, I'm against that idea. Now I think Indian literature is not the literature. You don't have to consider to be a part of Indian literature by writing in a regional language, especially after this one language, one nation concept and all. I think we should get beyond the boundaries of language, and we should aim for a true Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. We should aspire for the universal thing. I don't want to confine myself to an Indian writer, or I don't want to confine my writings to Indian literature for political reasons. And as an Indian who loves my country, I think it's very important for us to go beyond the boundaries of language and labeling our literature like in a very kind of very restricting sense. We do belong to the world, and the whole world is ours, and we are citizens of the whole world. And it is, at least in the case of literature, we should consider that there is no need for an Indian literature in the tag. We have to be a part. We have to be a speck of salt in the great ocean of all the citizens and all the people in this world.
So, I understand that you're also talking about the need to resist that label in a particular political context. But the political context will be...
See, what I want to tell you is that I'm against any kind of labeling at this point of time, because this is very political, and this is very crucial to our own existence, very crucial to the existence of future generations, that being Indian is nothing kind of being celebrating a kind of a false nationhood or nationality. It is beyond that. And through our literature, at least through our literature, we have to overcome that kind of, what should I say, restricting or kind of narrow outlook.
Okay.
Propaganda.
All right. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm against this confining. Even I have a problem with this, the title of this session. It should be many languages and many literatures. Why do you want one literature, one single literature for the whole literature? It's many languages and many literature, because there are many languages, because there are many states in this country, because there are many cultures in this country, and many type of people who belong to different beliefs, different customs and all, and our country belongs to them all.
Yes.
I agree with her. So it is ironic that I wrote a book which follows a geological fault line which goes through Andamans, Myanmar, Nepal, and then ends at this no man's land at the Yellow Sea. And out here I'm sitting and talking about my Indian literatureness. Both those categories are very, how shall I say, I dissent and resist that categorization. First of all, it's also really sad to be labeled in the Indian English category. I think it's one of the most impoverished categories in the various languages right now.
Why do you say that?
For the 7 years that I
agree with
wrote,
you.
I did not read Indian English because I had to detox my brain from Indian English. So, but I want to say this, as an artist and as a thinking individual, the end of identity politics for me is when I have the freedom to define myself. And I don't want to label myself with Indian English or sometimes elitism or gender. I don't know. I want to have the freedom at every moment to decide who I am. The first time I sat in one of these discussions and you were speaking about regional and Indian English, I also found it ironic that I was the only woman on stage, and I found it interesting that if I walked out into the night, who would be the more vulnerable one? Because I just sat there being sort of, turned into a bogeyman. I'm not saying that this is about this regional and all these divides. I'm just saying that we should have the freedom to explore the diversity even within us of the various people we are. And India is not a construct of its borders as it is now, right now, being turned into by rabid propaganda. I am an Indian because I believe in the constitutional values. So if those values of secularism and democracy even help me identify with Myanmar and the students' struggle there, then so be it, Let's use our identity to expand rather than, keep being insecure that who are we and what's happening out here. That's me.
No, that's fantastic. Yes. So, Aruni, this is a great point Shubhangi makes about the diversity within oneself, and you can be many different people. So, when you write in Assamese and you write in English, so is that one way of acknowledging the diversity within yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. When I write, I truly write from my subject position, which is that I'm Assamese, and I look at the world through a very Assamese lens because most of my life I have grown up as an Assamese. So I look at the world through a very Assamese lens. And when I moved out of Assam, I became a Northeastern, and I was asked that, this is my new identity. So this is also an identity now I have accepted. And I feel that all these different labels actually make me richer. In fact, I'm really agree with Shubhangi that I'm uncomfortable to call myself an Indian English writer because I would rather be in a tradition that has a written tradition till the 5th century than something that is only 200 years old. If I'm an Assamese writer, it allows me to draw from a much richer pool. I'm standing on the soldiers of giants. And I think calling myself an Assamese writer and writing with those specificities actually allow me to branch out as both Shubhangi and Meera have said, they are advocating for a certain kind of universalism. And I think that I'm able to do that by actually claiming my position as an Assamese writer in Guwahati and looking at the world through an Assamese lens. And that gives me a very interesting and unique perspective. It makes me richer. It gives me a perspective that is I think most other Indians don't have because I'm looking at the country and the world from a very unknown corner of the world. So all of these experiences, I believe that help me write a more eclectic, richer experience. And that is why I claim this with a lot of pride. And I think they're very enabling ones and not disabling ones. In fact, I teach creative writing for a living. And one of the things that most of my students want to do is, I want to write universal stuff. I want my work to be universal. And I say, your universality is actually going to emerge from the particular. look at Faulkner, for example, look at Toni Morrison, look at Joyce. They all write from a very, very unique position of their race or their culture, but they are universal because they don't try to make their work universal. The universality is actually in the emotional and truth. So in the same way, I believe that claiming the cultural roots that I have been brought up with allows me to actually become universal through the very specific experience that I am trying to record in my fiction, both in Assamese and English. And I think my English literary work definitely is informed and enriched by not just the lilt of Assamese, but also by Assamese folk traditions, Assamese political history, Assamese way of looking at the world.
Right. So, I mean, there's the Assamese way, and then there's a global space to play in, as it were. There's no need to sort of create this artificial boundary of a country.
No, I think, I don't understand your question.
I mean, there's Assamese and then there's world, but you're saying that there's really no need to talk about an Indian literature. Talking about your own writing.
I mean, I think it helps us theorize, what is Indian literature. I wouldn't say there is no need to, because there are certain concerns that Indians have. They're very common, and it helps us look at the work coming out from this country in a very specific way. It helps us begin conversations and find new answers. So I don't feel strongly about it, actually.
Okay, got it.
If somebody asks me, who are you, what kind of a writer, I would say I'm an Assamese writer. I'm from Assam. That's all I say, and that's who I am.
So you're right. I mean, for theorizing, it's a category that can be created for reading, analyzing, understanding, placing, but not necessarily from the writer's point of view, is what you're saying. So, Meera, sorry, did you want to add something?
No, that's it, yeah.
So, Meera, what literary tradition do you see yourself part of?
Oh, that's a very, not a question. What kind of literary tradition which I see a part of is a very difficult question. Because when you look at the books we had been reading, you see translations from almost all languages from across India and even outside. And these books are kind of a collective experience or collective literature. For example, you should know that we Malayalis grew up reading almost all the Bengali works translated into Malayalam. And we know Assamese writers like Indira Goswami. We consider her as one of us. And even Ajit Kaur's books and Amrita Preetham, everyone had been a part of our collective repertoire of literature. So for me, actually, I want to be the part of that tradition which connects me to that larger spectrum, which is not confined to the artificial boundaries of a nationhood or one language. This is quite important for me. And when you ask me, but I really think that the many languages in India are very important to us as citizens, because unless you know the value of language, after all, how does or where does the literature comes from? Literature becomes literature when someone observes his own surroundings and shares his or her memory about his surroundings. So this observation and memory emanates from the nature or the society he or she is living in, and literature becomes his or her literature with the kind of metaphors he or she is able to derive from the surroundings. So what makes a literature truly genuine or truly different is the kind of metaphors or kind of observation one can see in that. And what makes a person a writer, or what differentiates from a writer from even the other self, which is in him, as you said, no, we have different personalities too. So that is his observation and memory. And these memories cannot exist unless there is a language which fixes you to the surrounding where you are born and brought up, to the society or to the people who are living around you. So these many languages should exist in this country preserve or to sustain what you think as this country. This is very important. So I think I should be a part of that concept or that literary tradition rather than belonging to any specific or any narrow thing.
But at the same time, you are talking about the uniqueness of your language, right? And the whole cultural framework in which it exists. So, to that extent, are you not rooted, like it or not, in a stream of literature written in Malayalam?
Actually, it is kind of a shared form of world. No, you are quite rooted to your experience or your personal experience. At the same time, you are connected to the broader or the bigger canvas you have acquired. So this is what I want to be. I want to be part of the larger canvas, being the same person rooted to this.
Okay. And Shubhangi, for you, what role does English play?
Sorry?
English is not a language necessarily rooted in a geography in India. It may be certain urban spaces and certain regions as well. So where do you see yourself as a writer if you were to be placed in a stream? Who are the people who lie upstream of you?
So firstly, what role does English play in life? Now, my mother tongue is Hindi, and even though I jabber away in English, now when I talk to my 4-month-old baby, I'm singing songs that I make in Hindi. My default communication with her is Hindi, even if I want to speak in another language. So there are some emotional languages and there are some intellectual languages. And like I have spoken in the past, even to speak a language is a struggle for many people, any language. And like to give an example, dyslexia is there are many people who struggle with languages in their own ways. English has been a difficult language for me to communicate myself in, and which is why I've taken so long to write. English grammar is not meant for any human brain, I think, besides copy editors. The semicolon is a eighth wonder of the world or something. So, for me, I actively chose to communicate myself in a way where I could be heard. For me personally, the biggest struggle was, when we speak about roots, when Mr. Rushdie wrote about Latin America or Naipaul spoke about Africa, no one asked them about their roots and why they're writing about other cultures. And when I grew up reading books, I aspired to be like, say, Amitav Ghosh, but it's not as easy for me to travel and write about other cultures because I am a woman and he is a man. So to me, I have used language to break that barrier and get into, to get myself to do things which otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. And very often, some arguments of, say, comfort zone or roots were used to put me back in the room. Write about what you know. Don't write about what you don't know. And as a result, maybe I had to work doubly hard not to be a parachute writer and go live in places because I didn't carry that confidence that sometimes we unfortunately afford our male writers. So there are various difficulties as for where do I see my tradition and my roots. It is, like I say, it's in this room, we read across languages, we read through translation. It's that brilliant medium that allows us to read across translations, and that's what I actively did. I read only works in translation for almost 7 to 10 years to be critical of the language that I'm writing in.
So translation from other Indian languages or global literatures?
Indian, Icelandic, Japanese, Spanish, Arabic, Najib Mahfouz is fantastic. So all across, because language shapes, our worldview in so many ways. So why restrict it to a particular geography? And that's how, you can even, that's what you can use. You can subvert a language sometimes by bringing in inspirations and ways of looking from other languages. So that's where I stand.
Okay. Yeah, Mike.
I moved to Delhi in 2004 to study literature from Guwahati after doing my +2. The English Literary Society in my college actually organized a literary event, and I found that there's an Assamese poet who writes in English. Was one of the speakers. I was so thrilled because there are no Assamese writers who write in English, or writers from Northeast who write in English who lived and work in Delhi. That's so thrilled that I nearly stalked her, and now after almost 14, 15 years, we are very good friends. So the reason I wanted to share this anecdote is that how important it is for me to actually claim my roots, and how it's an enabling and emancipating tool for me. I come from Assam. I'm from Guwahati, and I'm from a region that is misunderstood and misrepresented, and all of these actually make for a far more interesting conflict. In my writing, that actually makes it exciting space, and makes it a very fecund space from where I can imagine stories. So I'm always going to claim all these labels and spaces, because it actually makes me so much more richer and fuller than just say I belong everywhere. And in fact, writers like Amitabh Ghosh takes a lot of pride in calling themselves Bengali writers who write in English. Rushdie also wrote in Imaginary Homelets about his rootedness to Indian literary traditions. I think most of the writers I admire actually are like that. They actually talk about, they are peripatetic in their professional life, but actually they claim extreme amount of rootedness, including the two writers I mentioned before, Morrison and Faulkner. So, they do this because they actually feel that claiming the South and claiming the Black American experience makes them very, very rich. Rich and claim a space that nobody else had claimed before. And I think that's an exciting space to be a writer. So I'd always call myself a writer from Assam or an Assamese writer.
Meera, is there a space similar to Aruni's that you would like to claim as yours?
See, for me actually, writing in my own language is very important. It's a political activity. It becomes more and more political because it's a way to assert the federal nature of our country in a way, or contribute to the concept of federal nature of the country, to assert that everyone has a place in this world. And on a personal level, I think it's very important to write in Malayalam just to preserve the kind of the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge associated with this language. Maybe after 50 years, I am not sure how many of our children will be speaking Malayalam. But at last, there will be someone who will be looking for the kind of flora and fauna which are associated with our language, which I don't want to lose. I want to preserve at least them for the future generation, which also is a part of kind of a political activity. No? So the kind of nationalism we have today is about countries and boundaries. But I think if you want to celebrate yourself as an Indian, the best way is to celebrate your languages, so that you understand the nuances of the language, you understand the meanings of you understand the importance of recapturing the lost words, which actually had hidden a lot of wealth of knowledge regarding your society, your people, your past, and your environment. This is very important. And I always think that writing, I'm very happy that I'm being translated into English, because translation is a great art, and it is not all can translate, but I want to express my thoughts, my observations, my experience in my language, because then I am sharing a kind of a shared memory, or I am documenting my own experiences for the people who will understand my language in some time in the future. This is important. It's not, when an author writes, it's not, she or he is not writing actually a story. he or she is expressing or illustrating her position in this world through her own metaphors. So those metaphors should be written in Malayalam language for me, or for a writer in another language, Kannada or Telugu. It could be associated with their language. This is very important because it is what which differentiates our literature from the global literature. So everyone writes to show that I am different in many ways. No, what I write is different or new in many ways. So if we subtract all these experiences, or the regional experiences, the regional nuances from our literature, there won't be anything new for the global readers. Okay, it will be just like another drop of water in the great ocean. So I don't want that. And I was on the jury of the JCB Prize, and one thing I have noticed is almost all the books have the authors in those books have turned their eyes not to outside but to inside their Indian experiences. And this is interesting. See, for your stories, you have to look around you rather than outside you, or imitate others. So everyone, each one of the books, or almost all the books collectively, will show you what the literature of our times is. There's no differentiation between Indian or Malayalam or English literature in that. But as a whole, they are all looking for the Indian audience because they have a lot to talk about their Indian experience. And I think that is the kind of nationalism we should look for, rather than going for one language and talking only one language and saying that it is kind of, we have to celebrate our nation through just one language. So this is very important for me, that I write in my language just to show that, just to assert our right to this country.
Right. In fact, yes, go on.
I actually agree with her wholeheartedly when she says that writing in Malayalam is a political act for her. It is the reason actually I write. I don't think I write well in Assamese. It takes me a lot of effort. My hands start to ache. For a long time I did not have Assamese on my laptop, Assamese script on my laptop. I used to write it on paper, then copy it, scan it, send it from the US or send it from Delhi to my Assamese editors. It was really a lot of hard work, but I always wanted to do it as a political act because I can, and also because I want to engage with the Assamese readership, but primarily because I wanted to do it as an act of assertion. When I decided to do it, I actually read an essay by Nadine Gordimer, where she talks about how white writers in South Africa are somehow out of history, and black writers are much more in tune with the making of the South African nation, because not just because they have been facing apartheid, resisting it, and building the nation into a more hued nation, multi-hued nation, but also because they are the majority and they are relevant. They talk about relevant issues, and she felt that white writers in South Africa were not as relevant. The only way they could make themselves relevant was to actually engage with issues that were very important for people of color in South Africa, engage with the languages, and make themselves relevant and part of the nation-building process, or part of the literary canon making, whatever it was. So I felt that, I think until 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of controversy and debate about Indian English writers and Bhasha writers, for the lack of a better word. And I didn't grow up with that anxiety, because everyone I know wrote in 2 languages, actually. Not fiction always, but wrote in 2 languages very easily. And all the writers who were important to me, from Aaraachaar Devi to Mahashala Devi, Indira Goswami, M.T. Vasudevan Nair, Vaikom Muhammad Bashir, all of them were, the writers who made me when I was young. I was reading them through 4 translations done by National Book Trust of India, and sometimes Sahitya Akademi, because there was no Penguin and Random House, they were doing it. So I thought that the only way I could escape from this debate was actually to remain very entrenched in an Assamese literary tradition and scene, and I did not want to be a part of this nascent literary tradition that was not very rich, and always had the specter of a global reader who would dictate the aesthetic choices that they would make, where I wanted to write about Jhalmuri, but without explaining what is Jhalmuri and explaining, spending 2 pages. You know which novel I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Shubhangi, okay, let's now come to this whole idea of Indian literature as a category for the West, or for editors and agents and publishers outside of India, or for agents in India who are trying to sell books to the West. Have you encountered this? Have you been labeled as an Indian writer?
You know, even if, so in the world of political correctness, people may avoid labeling, but it will show on things like the book covers and the way they describe you.
Man, those saris and bindis and peacocks.
I had a henna mehendi design on one of my book covers, which has no relevance to the book. And
Running women with
sorry?
running women with piles in their legs.
May as well put that. I hope, is this being recorded or broadcast?
Yes, it is.
Then I'll stick to a very broad description.
Didn't you just learn that you have to be completely specific to be universal?
You know what? I'm still insecure about my writing. Let me get A-listed and I'll talk more. But there is a level of exoticization which, to be honest, does not begin in the West. It begins in India and it begins in Delhi. It begins in the way the blurbs are written behind a book. It begins at the level. So I used to play a game with myself. I could spot the gender of the writer by the way the blurb is written. If it's a love story, it's a woman. If it's politics, it's a man. You know, this goes on. If it's climate change, it's a man. If it's nature, it's a woman. Really, you can sort of come up with this stereotyping. So this stereotyping that we start here gets a new twist in the West. In the Mistress of Spices meets guavas and mangoes and elephants or something. So I have been, and since my book is rooted in nature, I keep using that language. Use at least a natural symbol. You know, anything will do, but do not go back to the cultural, what you think India is. So that's where I'm
And
at.
the moment it becomes India in the publishing world, it becomes just this handful of symbols and images and stereotypes.
But like I said, it's not just a problem between us and the West, it's a problem
Right, it
within
starts
India
here.
also of stereotyping. The stereotyping is immense. And we have also had, there is another level of stereotyping which I'm very, very happy and proud to see that last year was broken, which is when a young woman decides to write, her youth somehow comes to the forefront and not her writing sometimes. And last year, writers were just spoken of as writers, you know. When I wrote for almost a decade before I got published, and I remember there was a line Alan Seeley had said long back, which I think has been forgotten by most people, that if you're young, good-looking, and a woman, it's easy to get published. And I was so depressed at that point that I thought, okay, even these things are not working for me right now, you know. Chalo, theek hai, stereotyping, but even that's not working. Now I realize that how wrong this whole, you know, stereotyping business goes for. It exists only for the, it exists only, I don't know why it exists, but last year I felt that had also changed. And if we want to change the image, we have to begin at home, by the way we describe our books.
But Arunava, I am really sad that you bring up the question of sales when we are talking about languages. Both of them won't go hand in hand, because you know what? As a translated author, I know that even when you go to the bookstall, maybe you have a prejudice against translations, because you think that either the reader thinks that something translated has lost something in that. Okay, I don't want to go into that anyway. When you are talking about languages, you should forget the sales and the financial aspect of that. You can't be kind of thinking about the finances and the linguistic wealth at the same. Linguistic wealth and the financial sales don't go hand in hand. I'm really sad about it. I wish It had, but unfortunately, we don't have to. Bringing up the sales won't contribute to the discussion on languages, because what I had been trying to say for many years, ever since my voice was heard outside Kerala, that is, there were people who cared to ask me what I think about translation and writing in regional language. I wanted to tell you this, that instead of being translated into English, I would be happy to be translated into my sister Indian languages, because I think that is one way to connect to them fully. But of course, in translating, that is an Indian reader within this artificial boundaries of this country, if he or she reads me in Malayalam or an Indian, in her own, or his own Indian language, he would have been more happy. He would have enjoyed my literature better, is what I think. But that doesn't mean that I am against being translated into English. Those who can't read me in an Indian language can, of course, we writers are greedy for more readers, no? So it is a part of that. Anyway, I think once you think about sales, and I think that thinking about sales has stopped or barred our works in different languages being translated into our sister languages. This is...
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to blame Arunava for bringing up sales, but actually this is something I want to talk about is, very briefly, is to any literary fiction editor, that literary fiction is supposed to make people uncomfortable and ask uncomfortable questions. Sales should not be the only way of it shouldn't be the decisive factor. And it's a very sort of capitalist, American corporate, big five publishing house logic, as if you can't sell it, it's bad. In fact, many of the editors who didn't want to publish my short story collection, I know hard feelings, they didn't want to publish. But, but they said, we love your stories, but we can't sell them. Then what are you doing there, being a literary fiction editor? You should be publishing E.L.R. James. I actually want to write erotic fiction if I could, if I had the time. But I don't have a problem with any of that. But don't tell me that you are a literary fiction editor and you can't sell literary fiction. You have to find new marketing ways of doing it. You have to fight it out with your sales team. And it's because literary fiction picks up sales 5 years later, sometimes a book comes back into the conversation. That's the job and nature and very fundamental, soul of literary fiction. And we don't have a very robust independent small press like the Canadian or British or the American one, because they are developed economies and they can afford to have those small presses. I'm publishing a poetry collection next year with a small press. It's not giving me any money, but I want to go with them because this the husband and wife duo has been running it for 40 years, and I was so full of admiration. And it's for them, it's just a political act to publish poetry for a very, very long time and publish the kind of poets they want to publish. And so this is possible in a developed economy to a great extent, not in a developing economy like us. So I think big publishing houses, which are not independent, who have more money, have a job to actually publish adventurous literary fiction that may not sell, but actually might challenge status quo, begin new conversations, and change the way we think about the country and literature. That's the whole job of literary fiction writer. If you're sitting there and changing, saying that I can't sell it, but I only change commas, you should not be doing your job.
Maybe we should redefine our concept of patriotism. No, it's not about standing on hearing the anthem, but actually respecting the other languages spoken in this country. So that would be a better way of...
Yes. Shubhangi, you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah. So maybe can you, Aruni, help us for a couple of minutes? Don't take longer, please.
You not my class.
You spoke at the outset about the convenience of India as a category for theorizing.
Yeah.
What did you have in mind?
It helps me teach my classes.
So you're doing the same thing. You're papering over the differences.
Actually,
for a Western
I actually
audience.
can't teach Indian literature in an English department, but I end up teaching South Asian literature. I'm being flippant, sorry. I think it's important to theorize because it enables us to look at the nation not through only the perspective of kings and queens and history writing, but also through the story of common people that literature actually records. So if you want to, like if I want to know about, say, South Africa, I always would pick up a book by Nadine Gordimer or Coetzee, to understand what it meant to live, during those times of apartheid. And now, Gordimer wrote post-apartheid novels as well. If I want to know what it meant to, grow up in a certain decade, post First World War, Second World War, in a small black American village, I would pick up Sula. Yes, I would read history as well, but for many people, Sula would be the first choice because, fiction is that popular medium through which people understand reality. So that is why. So if we want to, we don't need only political history. We also need literary history to understand what went on before. And that is why we need theorizations. And that is why we need anthologies. That is why we need literary fiction.
So you're saying that it may not be an artistic category, but it's an ontological category.
You can say that, yes, yeah.
I'm quite proud of myself for
Yeah, I know. I
coined
just,
that.
you just brought in ontology suddenly.
Yeah, we couldn't do a panel without ontology.
Yeah,
at some
absolutely.
point.
Very
Yes.
existential.
Yeah, this is a good time to, I'm going to open this yes question. So we'll start, we'll start with the lady in the middle and then work our way to the left and maybe to the right. Yes.
Good morning to all. I just have a really simple question. Would you rather be known as an author? This is open to all, the entire panel. Would you rather be known as an author who hails from a particular culture or writes about or in a particular language or about that culture? As in, for example, Meera ma'am, would you rather be known as a Malayali author or an author who writes in Malayalam? And like, sir, would you be rather known as an Assamese author or an author who writes about the Assamese context or in Assamese?
See, my dream is to be known as an author who writes in Malayalam, not a Malayali author. And I dream of writing one big, wonderful novel in Malayalam, which cannot be translated into any other language, so that all American, British, and other people who read other languages will learn Malayalam to read this in the original. And that's one day which I dream for.
I like to call myself a writer from Assam, mainly because nobody knows in Assam who is an Assamese. That is why.
There's that as well.
That's a different panel altogether. Couple of PhDs.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Manu.
This is hello. This is on the question of how you work with your translators. For example, Meera works with J. Devika, who's a very potent scholar in her own right, one of our most original feminist minds. Does her politics affect, is that an attraction that you get someone who's got such clarity politically to do your translations of your work? Because it seems to be a very constructive marriage between the two of you. And similarly, when Shubhangi or Aruni, when you guys are translating, Arunava also has political clarity. But if you guys are working with translators, do you also look for that kind of, is it merely the talent and the skill, or is it also the idea that this person must have a sort of political wavelength that matches my own wavelength?
Actually, Devya has made it very clear that translation is a part of her political activity. She always says that it is her life's mission to liberate, this is her words, to quote her own words, to liberate some of the writers who are kind of confined or restricted into one language to a wider audience. But that is a great thing, and I'm so thankful to her as well as the other translators for the service they have given me by exposing me to a wider audience. At the same time, as the author in me wish to be read in the original language which I have written.
I think my book has been translated to Assamese because I couldn't translate myself. And it's a good translation. That was the main, criteria. But if you're asking about political affiliation, if I'm understanding the question properly. Like, I don't want to work with a bigoted, homophobic, person. If he or she is a horrible person, I wouldn't work with them. But usually I would look for someone who is competent. And in fact, the Assamese translation of my first novel, House of a Thousand Stories, I would say it reads so much better in Assamese than my English work, because he is a linguist and he used a lot of proverbs and idioms that were from, he's an expert in Assamese dialects. So that were very common in Middle Assam, where I come from. And I know all of those words, it's just that I couldn't get the voice right. And he could get the voice right, so it was wonderful.
That's quite fascinating, really.
Yeah.
Yes, the lady there, if you could. Yes, we'll come to you.
Hi, this is not a question as such, but more of a comment. Actually, I come from Bihar, and I just wanted to share my experience that, like, I come from Bihar. My mother language is Bhojpuri, and when I was growing up, there were literally no books which I could read in my language, and then and I didn't realize it till the time I was traveling around the world and I saw people reading in their own languages, and then I was like, oh my God, we need some books. So I just wanted to ask one question. It's an open question you can take. How do you see this social, economic, and political scenario in India taking this discourse in the literature? Because I think that's very important. Am I not audible? Oh, okay. So how do you see this social, economic, and political situation in India taking this discourse forward in literature? Because I think that's very important to also discuss, as you said, like, we need always, when you go to this, to editors and you ask them to, they always think that there is no, you have no actually readers, for example, when I'm going and discussing that, should I write in Bhojpuri, many of my friends were like, no, I don't think so, because then who is going to read it? Always this dilemma.
So which question do you want answered?
How the political and economic scenario in India takes this discourse.
Do any of you have a quick, sharp answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, look at the multiple translations of Hum Dekhenge. It's happening all over the country spontaneously. I can see it reflected in literature already, in translation, which is a beautiful thing. I listened to Kannada translation, and one of my friends is doing an Assamese translation, and I've seen many other translations. So I can see that the political situation is influencing literature.
All right, thank you. Yes, the gentleman there, and then the gentleman here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Agee. I'm editor of Irish Pages, which is a journal and a press. It's a very interesting discussion. Our journal is bilingual, of course, because Ireland has 2 languages, so I'm very interested in the topic. I would just say that some of the things that are touched upon, like stereotyping and Orientalism, actually exist within the West, and I'm sort of seeking your comments. The attitude of London publishing to Ireland is somewhat Orientalist, actually, It's super fashionable, anything Irish. And the problem really is not so much national boundaries as big metropolitan megapolises. The metropolitan with a map simply doesn't understand so-called peripheral cultures. That's the first thing I would say. Second thing is that the stereotyping issue, which is a huge issue now in publishing, I see it at the coalface, interacts with agents in fiction. I mean, in the West, you simply can't get fiction published without an agent. And the agents, half of them are total ignoramuses who do not read. They're interested in pitches in the first chapter. They never read anything. So we have an ignoramus media, social media, publishing business model, which is sort of pushing out the actual literary taste of people who maybe are more close to literature. Third thing is the struggle of independent publishers is probably, in the context of the West, just as difficult as it is in India. It's not simply allowed by a developed economy. It's tough in Western terms
Thank
as well.
you. Yes,
The
Shubhangi?
stereotype issue is really interesting. So it exists within the West. And yeah, I'd be interested in any comments on what I just said.
I would like to add to it rather than, try to resolve it. Now with audiobooks, this exoticization is going to take another tone of the accent. Because that's something I face. Indian English sometimes is assumed to be what that guy speaks in Simpsons. So now we will have to engage with the stereotyping across medium. Maybe it's in the Netflix web series world also. It's not just a book is no more a book, so we will have to look at it across mediums also and fight it in all those
Also,
ways.
a very interesting question of which person, what your gender choices of the narrator when the book is written in the third person.
Isn't it tragic that we in our literature, in our work, try to demolish stereotypes and then we ourselves are turned into stereotypes by the publishers?
Yes, that's true. Yes, over here, please. No, this gentleman here first. We'll come to you if there's time.
Good afternoon. My question is, rather than calling it Indian literature, because as you mentioned it, Indian literature kind of removes the identity from other languages, would it be a more prudent term to call it as Indian literatures, whereas it's a more inclusive identity of, it asks for a more inclusive identity, whereas recognizing the diversity of languages that India have? Like the terminology, because I was a literature student and we did a course called Indian literatures as opposed to Indian literature, and we were told why it was Indian literatures. So would that be a better terminology?
Yes, I think it's taught in across. Arunava and I taught a course like that, Indian literatures. I'm currently teaching a course at the University of Georgia called Contemporary Indian Literatures. I think that's the best way to refer to it.
Yeah, in fact, I'd be more precise and call it literatures from India, rather than use an adjective.
Yes.
Yes,
Completely agree.
Yeah, the lady here in green, and then the gentleman on her right, and then maybe we can take three
Thank you
questions.
for that wonderful panel. You're talking about the centralizing of Indian literature. Like, do you think that through the translations, like the sister language, translating in sister language, do you find it more difficult? It will be a great effort to centralize through translating in other sister languages. For example, you will take a lot of huge effort because from Malayalam to Gujarati, Malayalam to Tamil, or Malayalam to because Malayalam to English itself, sometimes we don't feel we are not the writer is not okay through the translation. So if it is a multiple translation, do you think it's a huge effort as a writer? So how do you see that translating in multiple languages and trying to reach your readers in India?
See, I wish, may I answer? Yes. I wish there be a bank of translators, a pool of translators who can translate into different languages within the Indian languages. And that would be wonderful. Because all literary works are being translated into English first and then into, if someone has to translate my novel into Hindi, normally I wish there will be someone who can read Malayalam as well, can handle both languages with ease. But it will be kind of unthinkable in today's situation of an Assamese or even an Urdu translator translating my novel straight from Malayalam into his or her own language. So I wish that was possible. And it is so sad that even after 70 years of independence, we Indians have not been patriotic enough to learn our languages of our sister communities and master them.
Yes, thank you. Let's take two quick questions and then we'll answer them together. So the gentleman there, yes, him, and then yes, and then the other one behind.
Okay, so Shubhangi ma'am was saying that there shouldn't be any labeling of male and female writers. So yesterday Arunava was saying that the publisher should stop the publishing publishing the writings of male authors and should enhance the writing of female authors. So isn't that contradictory?
Okay, we'll get that answer. Let's get the other question as well. Yes, yes. to this gentleman there.
I'm just interested in whether anybody has any comments on how the partition of India affected the sense of a shared literary tradition, especially when you had languages like Punjabi and Bengali basically being partitioned into different states.
Yes, that's a great question. So, Shubhangi, you want to take the first one? Sorry, you're responsible for something I said yesterday.
Sorry, I didn't.
No, it was in a different context that the thought
what
came
did
up
you
that.
say?
In a different context, the thought came up that if fewer men were published, or maybe none
Yeah.
for a short period of time, then more women would be automatically published and read. And that is very important to right the imbalance. And the gentleman there was saying that that is contradictory with. Yes.
See, it's not surprising that more women are being published because, fortunately or unfortunately, it's women who have more stories to tell than the men of this country. So it is quite natural.
Thank you. And the partition, yes, that's a very important question.
I mean, there's a whole body of literature in Bengali and Punjabi and, about partition. There are novels, short stories. There are entire semester-long courses on partition literature. It still casts a shadow in the literary imagination of writers to some extent.
Yes, but also you're right in that an artificial distinction has been created. The languages are the same, the cultures are the same, but an artificial distinction has been created between the literatures because of political borders. So Bengali being a classic example, Bengali literature from the Indian part of, from West Bengal and Bengali literature from Bangladesh are very similar in many respects, and yet they're considered two separate literatures because of partition. Absolutely, yes. I'm afraid we'll have to end it there, but the authors are available for signing and further discussions. Very sorry, Mr. Okay, maybe quickly, Mr. Thomas, yes. Yes. Yes, if you can give him the mic, quick comment. We won't have to respond, just listen to the comment.
Came in late, but you see, I am A.J. Thomas, I am editor of Indian literature of the Sahitya Akademi, and I have been doing, someone said here about Indian literatures. You see, I've been a kind of intermediary in both Indian literature and Indian literatures. And interestingly, IndLit, I claim that I coined it in 2004, to create an email ID for Indian literature.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shubhangi, Meera, and Aruni.
I'm going to take my liberty from Meera ji and retitle the session just for now. IndLit, many languages and many literatures. A big round of applause for all the participants. Apart from KR, Meera, and Aruni Kashyap, Shubhangi would also be available for book signings. That's right to your left once you exit the venue. Thank you so much.